everybody. My name is Allycia Wolff. I work with the ARC Minnesota, and I'm here today to talk about future planning. So I'm going to try to wrap up my presentation by like 3:10 so we can get back on schedule. Please ask any questions throughout the presentation. I want this to be more of a discussion. I'm going to talk about a lot of pieces of future planning today. So this is a big discussion that usually takes years and years to absorb. So ask any questions as they pop up. Before we start, can I get a show of hands of how many people here live in Minnesota? Okay, okay, all right, great. So some of the information that I'm going to have is going to be specific to Minnesota. I won't spend too much time focusing on that. I'll give a lot of general tips on how to do future planning for regardless of where you are in your kid's life or where you are living in the world or in the United States. But again, any questions that you have throughout, please go ahead and ask as they come up. And then how do I switch slides?
Oh, I will do that for
you.
you.
Okay, sorry. Just let me know. Okay, so I work for the ARC Minnesota. You may have heard of the ARC as a general organization throughout the United States. We have an ARC United States chapter, and then that's like our umbrella organization. And then underneath that, there's local branches. So the ARC Minnesota is what serves the whole state of Minnesota, and we are primarily an advocacy organization. So if families feel like they're hitting that proverbial red tape, and you really want services and you're trying to get support, but you don't know how to access medical assistance, or you don't know how to access assistance with your child's IEP, you can call us, and we have experts in each of those areas that will help you navigate that. Each state's chapter has different areas of expertise, you could say. They have different services. So some ARC chapters will be solely advocacy like ours, and then other ARC chapters will have employment services or housing providers. So whatever state you're in, it may look specific to your state. Basically, we help people navigate disability services. My job specifically at the ARC is I help people do future planning, I help people understand guardianship, and I do a lot of work in community connections as well. I help people think about creating friendships and belonging in their community, and how to do that, and different tips and tricks for that as well. All right. So we believe that everybody deserves a good life now and in the future, and that's what our future planning work concentrates on. We're not only thinking about 20, 30 years down the road, we're thinking about right now. Because right now, we believe that everybody deserves a good life. So in planning for the future, we're also planning for the present. As you are thinking about future planning, I'm sure that a lot of these questions have popped into your head. How do I make sure that my child always has a good life? That's something that a lot of parents think about. What will happen when I'm gone? We actually started developing our future planning programs because we were having a lot of parents coming to us and they were saying, I'm the sole caretaker for my son or daughter with a disability. What happens if I can't act in that role anymore? What happens if I suddenly pass away, or what happens if I'm in a car accident, or what happens if I'm in the hospital? Even one parent may have different responsibilities than other parents. So how do I make sure that I'm communicating, and how do I make sure that I'm planning all of that? That's a really good reason to do future planning. One second. Yep, so what can the future look like? That's a big piece in future planning as well. If you guys think back to 5 years ago in your life, you probably didn't expect that your life would look really anything like it does today. You know, the services and supports that are available right now are very different than they were 5 years ago, so that's something that we can talk about in future planning as well. How do I set things in motion? How do I prepare for as much as possible? And who will be there? These are all really big questions that we try to tackle in future planning. So, why should I plan? I think that all of you are here for very specific reasons in thinking about future planning, but a lot of people come and work with us to go through those motions because they believe it's the best gift that they can leave behind. A lot of parents and caregivers have a limited network of support because supporting their child has really been a sole focus. for so long. So there's not as much support as they would want. So planning who's going to be there isn't necessarily the easiest thing, but it's something that's really necessary in planning for the future. And it's the best gift that you can leave behind is that peace of mind not only for you, but the other people in your network. So if you have other children that don't have disabilities, studies show that children at the age of 5 start to think about, am I going to be the one that cares for my brother and sister? So having that conversation early and starting to designate who's going to do what and what role everybody is going to play is really peace of mind for everybody. Planning for the future can also preserve government benefits. As I'm sure some of you know, if you're on medical assistance or Social Security, there's certain asset limits. So to utilize those programs, you have to be below a poverty line, right? So it forces people to live in poverty to be able to access services that they need. That doesn't mean that you can't do future planning. It doesn't mean that you can't leave your child money upon your passing. It just means that you have to do it in a very specific way so that those government benefits are still secured. And so doing that future planning can make sure that your child is still receiving all of those benefits that you work so hard to secure, but you're still giving them money that you want to leave behind. These are the elements of future planning. When we break it down, sometimes these are in like really broken down, but sometimes I like to compare it to a 3-legged stool. So if you think of a 3-legged stool, if one of those legs is missing, then that stool is going to fall over. And so the 3-legged stool that we talk about in future planning is quality of life, legal planning, and financial planning. And if you don't have one of those, then that stool is going to be wobbly and it may tip over. So if you do all of the legal planning, if you do all of the financial planning, if you have a will and you have a trust and you have enough money saved away, but you've neglected to think about what actually makes a good life for somebody, then that's uneven, that's unbalanced. Or if you concentrate solely on your child being happy and you save as much money as you can, but you don't set up a trust, then that's going to throw everything out of whack. So when you're doing future planning, regardless of what kind of support you're getting, it's important to manage and balance all of those pieces. And these overall are the ones that we concentrate and talk about. We'll go in depth to each one of these throughout the presentation, but this is just kind of the table of contents of what you can concentrate on when you're thinking about future planning. All right, so quality of life and circles of support. So a circle of support is who is in a person's life. As I mentioned, this is a lot of the work that I do as well, is building those natural supports. So there's many studies in what makes a good life for people. There's a really famous TED Talk on the matter. I don't know if you've seen it, but this man talks about this 60-year-long study done by Harvard University that followed, I think it started with like 600 men back in the 20s. And it followed all of those men, and then it followed all those men's children, and then followed all of the grandchildren. And what it found is that what makes a good life for people are connections, the relationships that they have. It's not necessarily the money that they make or the career milestones that they hit or any of those other things. It's the people that they share their experiences with. And what's interesting is that you'll find that from study after study after study after study. And I reference a study done by Allycia, who is a man in Canada who does a lot of research on things that affect people with disabilities. And what he found is that there's 5 main areas that contribute to a good life for a person. And this is disability or not. This is for anybody, these 5 main components. And what's interesting is that regardless of what study you look up, you can see direct correlations between each of the studies. So they will each pick out the top 5 things. You could look at like the blue zones of happiness. They have very similar points that they bring out. But what they found is that one is relationships, who you have in your life. The other is home. And this isn't necessarily like a home like a house, but it's a sense of home. It's a sense of belonging. It's that feeling that you get when you go home and you have the, I'm home. For me, it's my dog. For some people, it's the tea set that their grandma handed down to them. That sense of home really creates that good life and belonging for people. Choice, having choice in your day, so that's maybe what you have for breakfast or what your career is. A meaningful contribution. Some people could say that this is work. Some people could say that this is volunteering. I know a person who their contribution is that they remind me to have fun. I think that we all lose that as adults really easily, so whenever I'm with him and I support him in his life, he reminds me to giggle and to have fun, and that's his contribution to me. You know, everybody wants to feel needed and to feel loved, and so that's what he gives to the world. And then wealth is the last one. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to be wealthy to have a good life. It just means that to have a good life, a certain amount of wealth is important. And the wealth translates to being able to afford the things that bring you happiness, or being able to afford the things that make you healthy and safe. So that's what we mean by wealth. So balancing these 5 things can really help in contributing to a good life. And what you'll notice as I say this presentation is it's all about balance. You know, the 3-legged stool and then the 5 areas of what makes a good life. Okay, so switching gears a little bit. In doing future planning for yourself, you can either reach out to an organization to do future planning, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The ARC supports people in that. Or you can try to do it yourself. Nothing that we do at the ARC and guiding people through future planning is something that you couldn't do by yourself. But it's really whatever people would prefer. So in doing it by yourself, something that you may know already is that you have a lot of information that you inadvertently don't really share with anybody else. Because it has taken you years and years to gather up that information that you know about the ins and outs of your kid. You know that in the morning, if this happens, then this is going to be the succession of events for the day. Or you know that your kid will not go to bed unless A, B, and C happen. Or if you miss a med, then these things are going to happen. Those are the things that you know uniquely as parent that you maybe haven't had the opportunity or the necessity to write down. So in doing future planning, not only thinking about the future and thinking about what's going to happen next, but also documenting the here and now, because you've worked so hard to make sure that your kid is living a good life right now. So write down those things that you know uniquely, what medications work and don't work. I'm sure that you've all tried at least a dozen medications that haven't worked for whatever reasons. So write down the medication, why it hasn't worked, and why you wouldn't want to try it again. Because that can be really valuable information to another caregiver or to your spouse or to a grandparent when you're on a vacation. God forbid a vacation, right? Other things, who to contact, what doctors, favorite sports, grilled cheese sandwiches. Maybe a grilled cheese sandwich is a comfort item that your kid has and you know that, but maybe that's not something that you've necessarily communicated elsewhere. And then we have that purple shirt up there because clothing preferences can mean a lot to some people. So having a cotton shirt versus a polyester shirt, or wearing long sleeves versus short sleeves, or sweatshirts that have hoods versus sweatshirts that have zippers. You know, for some people, those are really important distinctions on what makes them happy and what creates a good day or a bad day. Okay, and then once we get into future planning, in Minnesota, we are moving towards a practice called person-centered planning. Has anybody here heard of person-centered planning? Okay, great, wonderful. So person-centered planning is the radical belief that people know what they want out of their life, and they have opinions and thoughts and hopes and dreams. That's what person-centered planning is, basically. It's an opportunity to sit down and have somebody ask you what you want out of your life and have your network, so your family, support you in that journey. Because typically, for people with disabilities, historically, people have been told you're going to work here, you're going to live here, you're going to take these meds. You know, if you look at our institutional model of what was happening back in the 50s and 60s, people would go to an institution and they would be told, this is what you're going to do with your day. As we're switching that narrative, we're making it so that services don't dictate a person's life, the person dictates a person's life. So I would really encourage everybody at some point here to think about person-centered planning, because it puts the person in the center of their life and their family. It's a family-centered process as well. You can do it when your children are 5 or 6 to help you think about how to help your kid reach certain milestones and get to certain points. And you can do it when your kids are in transition. Because I'm sure we can all remember too that time back when we were graduating high school and we're like, oh crap, what am I going to do next? You know, that's a big moment when you're stepping into adult life. For people with disabilities, it's even more intense because there's additional barriers and things to consider. So person-centered planning, again, allows people the opportunity to sit down and think about what they want and to create an actual plan to get there. So some of the visuals I have up here are typical jobs that people tend to say that they want. You know, you ask a 6-year-old, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you'll probably get like an artist or a firefighter or a teacher or something like that, or what their parents do. So what we do in person-centered planning is we talk to people about why that career is interesting to them or what about it they like. So if somebody says, I want to be a veterinarian, we ask, what about that is exciting to you? What about being a veterinarian is something that appeals to you? And then we'll get a variety of different answers. We'll hear that they want to work with animals, or that they want to wear a white coat, or that they want to go to work during the day. And from that, we're able to gauge what's important to a person so that we can help them go down that walk of life. Because maybe being a veterinarian and going to 15 years of school isn't in that person's journey, but we can still get a lot of information by just having that conversation and helping people move in that general direction in hopes of living a good life. All right, and in this conversation of circles of support, we have a lot of people say, but I don't have anyone. You know, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times when parents are raising kids with disabilities, there's a lot of time and effort and appointments and medications and management. There's a lot of stuff that you are consuming your whole day with. So friendships that you had for your whole life may not be a priority anymore. Or relationships may be strained because that other person doesn't know how to support you. So a lot of people feel a sense of not really having anyone in their life. So this is something that we can talk through as well, is how do we build that circle of support? How do you create more people in your life and more supports so that your child always has what they need regardless of your role in their life? I mean, you are a parent, you will never be replaceable, but part of that peace of mind that you can do in future planning is knowing that there's going to be other people that can step up to do some of the things that you're doing now. And that's a conversation that we can have in helping build that circle of support. There's a lot of different tools that we can utilize, and a lot of language that you could do. This is a whole nother presentation, and I'm not meaning to buzz over it. But building those circles of supports and having a really robust network is something to concentrate on when your children are young and really at any age, because that's going to be something that is going to be really important to your child and their quality of life and your quality of life as well. All right, so legal planning. How many people here have a will? Okay. How many of those people is that will more than 5 years old? Not that many. Okay.
What's the question?
That's great. How many people have a will?
Yeah.
Okay. So wills are usually one of those things that's easy to put off. It's easy to put it off. It's easy to not do it because it's intimidating, and it's really hard to sit there and face, in a way, your own mortality in a moment where your family is going to be without you. So wills are really important to fill out when you are supporting somebody with a disability, because it communicates what your wishes and hopes are. And you can include a lot of things in your will that you may be surprised about. So in your will, you can, of course, include successor guardians. You can include this if your child is over the age of 18 as well. You can include who you would want to manage your financial estate. And you can, in your will, specifically in Minnesota, you can include in your will specific language so that any money that you leave to your child won't affect their government benefits that they're receiving. So some of the information that I'm going to share with you in the upcoming moments here is going to be specific to Minnesota, but I will try to make it as nationwide applicable as possible. So wills are really important. We recommend that you work with an attorney that specializes in special needs planning. And I say this specifically, and if there's anything that you'll take away from this presentation, is to work with an attorney that really truly knows what they're doing and has experience. Just last month, I met with a family who had spent $5,000 doing an estate plan, and I opened up their trust document, and within 30 seconds, I knew that they needed to go back to a different attorney because the language was incorrect. And that is such a hard place to be at for a family, because you've put so much time and effort in creating this estate plan, and then with just a single sentence being incorrect, it can negate the whole document that they set up. So what ended up happening with this family is they went to an attorney that specialized in special needs planning, and it only took just like a few amendments to make it work. So it wasn't as catastrophic as we initially thought that it was going to be, but that's why it's so important that you work with an attorney that truly knows how to do special needs planning. So a lot of people will say, well, my sister does elder planning. Isn't that close enough? Or my neighbor down the street is an attorney and I really like them. There's a lot of attorneys out of the kindness of their hearts that really want to help families and do this area of law, and will say that they can. And it's a wonderful thing that people want to help, but you really truly have to work with somebody that is very experienced. So we at the ARC Minnesota have a list of attorneys that we trust to do work in this area, and you can call our organization and we'll give you this list at any point. They're based out of the Twin Cities here. But if that wouldn't be applicable to you, I would highly recommend that whatever attorney you choose, first of all, has the language on their website, so promotes it as a service that they offer to the general public. And then ask, how many special needs trusts have you done in the last year? And if it's under the number of 5, I would say try to call around and find somebody else, because it is vitally important that if you're going to spend all that money in doing future planning and going through the process of establishing a will and a trust, that it's what you specifically need it to be for. So the will is an important piece in future planning, as well as the power of attorney. You can do a power of attorney for yourself, so that the responsibilities that you have in decision making for your child can be passed off to somebody else. People with disabilities can do power of attorneys as a decision making substitute as well. So if somebody still needs help in making decisions but you don't want to take guardianship, then you can do a power of attorney to help somebody make those decisions. Healthcare directives are really important. We recommend that everybody in the family has a healthcare directive. So healthcare directives are where you state in a legal form what you want healthcare decisions to be like in the instance where you're not able to make those choices. So we recommend that families have that conversation now and do one for their child as well. And our reasoning for this is, when you go through if you were to go through that process today, you would be at your current state of mind. You would be fairly, I don't know everybody's situation right now, but you would be in a fairly unstressed place, right? Whereas if you're in the hospital and if you're faced with a decision that's really difficult to make about somebody's life, you are at a heightened state of stress. And you may make a different decision at that point than you would right now. So that's why we recommend everybody make a healthcare directive, because then it opens up the conversation of what do we want that decision to be if that situation would ever present itself to us. Then you know what kind of decision you want to make for your spouse, for your child. Another note in healthcare directives is that your agent, the person who is carrying out your healthcare directive, doesn't, and maybe sometimes shouldn't, be your partner or your spouse or the person that makes the most sense. My healthcare director is my best friend and not my spouse. Because I truly, and we've had the conversation, that my spouse wouldn't be able to be in that position to make the decisions that I would want to make. So that's something to consider as well. We have healthcare directives that we recommend. There's a short healthcare directive and a long healthcare directive. The short healthcare directive is for people that are in good health. The long healthcare directive is for people that are elderly or not in good health, or for whatever reason want to have a more in-depth conversation about healthcare directives. So if you contact me, I can certainly send you those. Honoring Choices is a wonderful resource when it comes to healthcare directives as well. So the next piece in legal planning is guardianship. I'm not sure how many people here that applies to, but when somebody turns 18 in the United States, they're legally considered their own adults, so they can legally make their own decisions. Some people with disabilities do not have the ability to make decisions, which is why our country has established guardianship. It's different in each state, but just know that you have options and you have choices in guardianship. It's not all or nothing. It's not let my kid make every decision, and it's not I'm going to take all of the decisions for my child. There's an in-between, and there's many things that you can do that will specifically work for your child. So for instance, in Minnesota, there's 7 different powers of guardianship. So guardianship is broken into 7 different decision-making areas. So if you think your child only needs help in 1 or 2 areas, you can take just those 1 or 2 areas instead of all 7 areas of guardianship. Many states have similar models, so something to consider when your children get to be that age.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
About the legal guardianship. So you have legal guardianship with your child when you're 18, and you pass away, obviously. How does that, should you, prior to your death, assign somebody else legal guardianship of your child? How does that?
Okay, so the question is, if you have established legal guardianship when your kid is after the age of 18, right? Guardianship is a court process.
Right.
So to establish guardianship, you have to go to a court and you have to have a judge say, yes, I see that this person has an incapacity and they need somebody else to make decisions for them. So, what's the word? Successor guardianship after the age of 18. You have a few different options. So some parents will put in their will what their wishes are for successor guardianship. So you can say in your will, in the event of my passing, I want this person to, or I would prefer this person to act as guardian. And you could do like 5 or 6 people down. So I've seen lists where it's number 1, I want Aunt Kathy, number 2, I want cousin Bob, number 3, I want this person, number 4, I want this professional service, and number 5, in this instance, I would like this organization to help seek an appropriate option, so that you have a list of your wishes in your will. This is only your wishes. So if in the event of your passing, that person that's on your will would still have to go to court and would still have to go through the whole process to be approved as a guardian. So that's one option. Your other option is having co-guardians. So some parents, both parents will be guardian. Some people will do or both parents and a cousin, or both parents and an adult sibling, if that's a role that they want to play. So in the event that somebody passes away, you don't have to go through that whole court process again because somebody is already standing in there as guardian. Did that answer your question?
It did.
Okay.
How many co-guardians can you have? Is there a limit?
How many co-guardians can you have? In Minnesota, I have not seen more than 3 co-guardians at a time. So it's usually the 2 parents and then somebody else. And the reason for that being, I've never seen 4 or more, because that's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. That's a lot of people that are going to have to help one person make decisions about their life. And if you think about your life, every decision that you make, do you consult 3 people for every decision that you make all the time? You know, that's a lot of people, and everybody would have to agree about those decisions. And in Minnesota, you can't split up who is making what decisions in reference to the court. You can organize that yourself as a family unit, but the court isn't going to say, this person's responsible for this person's responsible for this, and this person's responsible for this. Yeah.
Okay, but what if in the instant that, say, I'm the aunt, but my husband is not, and if something in the long run turns out something happens to me besides, they still have to have the guardianship, right?
I don't understand the question.
In my case, it was my nieces. We did all the legal thing, but then when it came to me and then my husband taking over if something was for me, he also had to go for guardianship, but my sister has already passed away.
Anytime there's a change in guardianship, you have to go back to the court.
Okay, but no, that's not my question.
Okay.
Okay, so if I got the legal guardianship, which I did,
Yep.
but if something happens to me, there's nobody left.
Yes, so in that situation where you are acting as guardian and there's not a big network of support, that's when maybe you could call the IRC to talk about how building networks of support may fit into your family life. And also, let's say that you were to pass away and there would be nobody else that would be able to act as guardian. Then that guardianship case, that person would be called into court, would go to court, and then the court would find a court-appointed guardian, a private guardian who would be paid to act in that role. Any other guardianship questions? I think that a lot of you are many years away from thinking about it, probably. My best piece of advice is to encourage decision-making whenever, however, in whichever ways. So really, because if you think about when you were 18, I'm sure that there were a lot of decisions that your parents didn't agree with and a lot of mistakes that you made and a lot of things that you learned from that. So practicing decision-making early on and having some of those protected failures can help people know how to make decisions when the moment really counts, or know who they can turn to in those moments as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a quick question. My daughter is 17 and a half.
Okay.
And some of our other special needs friends, kids have just turned 18, and some of them have chosen not to do guardianship.
Absolutely.
And to only do power of attorney.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. That's definitely what the ARC promotes, is we believe that guardianship should be a last resort. And that guardianship should only be considered when other decision-making supports are not sufficient. So there's a power of attorney, you can sign releases of information, you could do a healthcare directive, you could create a supported decision-making agreement, which is the fancy term, but a supported decision-making agreement is basically like a casual contract. You know, I use the example of when I was 16, I got my driver's license. A lot of my friends had agreements with their parents, like you will not drive before 6 a.m. or after 10 p.m. You know, that's not a legal document, but that was just what their family had agreed upon. You know, so that that everybody was on the same page. They knew who they could turn to. They knew what the expectations were. You can do that in a supported decision-making agreement as well. So instead of doing a legal guardianship and legally taking somebody's rights away to make their own decisions, you can do a supported decision-making agreement so that whenever somebody needs help in a certain area, they know who to reach out to and how to help. So that's what I'm saying when I want you to know that there's options within guardianship. And it varies from state to state, but we're making a lot of progress in alternatives to guardianship and not just jumping right into that model. All right, so trusts and ABLE accounts. Does anybody here currently have a special needs trust set up? Okay, so a few, good. That's about the percentage that I was expecting, so if you didn't raise your hand, don't feel like you're behind. Don't feel like you haven't done something that you need to do yet. It's a lot of information to absorb. I myself probably had to listen to this presentation and talk with my team about 10 times before I truly understood what a trust was. So conceptually, a special needs trust is a way that you can save a large amount of money for your child without it affecting their government benefits. Because if somebody's on Social Security, they can only have $2,000 to their name. If somebody's on medical assistance in Minnesota, they can only have $3,000 to their name. Now, $2,000 and $3,000 isn't a lot in general, right? That's really forcing people to live in a life of poverty, and it makes it so that it would be really hard for you to leave your child money in your will upon your passing. But you still want to do that because you know how much money and time and energy it costs to support somebody. So a trust is a vehicle that enables you to leave your child money without it affecting their benefits. A trust is it's a standalone unit. It has a tax ID number, which is basically like a Social Security number. That's why it's not considered the person's assets, it's the trust. And the trust has a trustee that you would designate. So whoever that trustee could help spend the money in a way that supports your child and their life. Okay, so absorb that for a moment. One more. I will get your question. The ABLE account is a checking account that, if you have a disability that occurred before the age of 26, you're eligible to open. I would recommend this for most everybody. I think that it's a wonderful resource. ABLE account, it stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. The acronym doesn't really matter. There's a million acronyms in our world, right? But the ABLE account allows people that are receiving government benefits to save up to $15,000 a year, $100,000 over lifetime, without it affecting their benefits. So I was just talking to a mom 2 days ago who her daughter graduated from high school and received like $3,000 at her graduation party. That's wonderful. But she was really lost of what to do with the money. She was like, if I put this into my daughter's checking account, her Social Security is going to go away because that's over the asset limit. So I encouraged her to set up an ABLE account so that the money in the ABLE account, since it's under that $15,000 threshold, will not be considered an asset for Social Security because, again, that first $15,000 is disregarded from Social Security and medical assistance. So $15,000 a year, so that would be $15,000 the first year. The second year you could save another $15,000, so it'd be $30,000, with a max of $100,000 over lifetime. And the ABLE account's a checking account. You can get a debit card, so it's one that you can learn financial management skills in right now, whereas the trust is a future planning tool, something that you could put in your will, that your parents could put in their will. So that's a very brief overview on the trust and the ABLE accounts. I'll start, I do have another slide on the trust, but I'll start answering questions. First, your question.
I just had a question about the trust. Who do we talk to about setting one of those up? Now, that might be your later slide as well.
No, who do you talk to about setting that up? So that's a really good question. Like I said before, for trusts, even more so than wills. For a trust, you really have to work with an attorney that knows what they're doing. So we have a list in the Twin Cities area of attorneys that practice in that field, but you would want to work with a special needs law attorney. You'll get close if you Google like elder law attorneys, but because it's in the same practice. But you want to make sure, again, ask that question, how many special needs trusts have you set up in the last year? If it's less than 5, I would recommend that you look around. I'm not saying that that attorney would then be incompetent, but it's so vitally important that those benefits are preserved. Yeah.
For the ABLE account, are there any restrictions both pre and post 18 years old?
It depends on what you mean by that question.
I mean, it's just a checking account that basically we put in our child's name. I assume we would be a guardian of it up till 18. But I mean, it can be spent on anything, or it has to be spent on medical or...
So both, again, good question. So I would recommend that just for the sake of ease and clarity, to set up an ABLE account before your child turns 18. Because after a person turns 18, then they have to be the one that says, yes, I want an ABLE account, I can manage it and set it up on my own. You can still support your child after 18 with the ABLE account, but just for the sake of ease, set up before the 18th birthday, if possible. an ABLE account has a debit card, so you can support your child in spending and managing that money as well. The restrictions for the ABLE account is you have to have acquired disability before the age of 26, and the $15,000 a year, $100,000 over lifetime.
I guess my question is, are there restrictions on what you spend it on?
Oh, yes.
Spend it on utilities.
Thank you. So for both the trust and the ABLE account, they can be spent on disability-related services that are not already covered by Social Security and medical assistance. So Social Security covers rent, and so you can't use money from the trust or the ABLE account to pay for rent, unless you can communicate with Social Security that rent is above and beyond what Social Security is paying for, is covering. So if you get $500 for Social Security, but your rent is $800, you have to have a conversation with Social Security to say, we're already spending the Social Security money on rent, so we need the trust and the ABLE account to go above and beyond that. But the trust and the ABLE account can only be spent on what is not already covered by Social Security and medical assistance. An easy example that I use is going to the dentist. So medical assistance will cover 2 cleanings a year, but if somebody needs a crown, that's not going to be fully covered by medical assistance. So you could use additional funds from a trust or from an ABLE account to pay for those services. Yeah.
Sorry, so like, let's say we're not around anymore. Can our kids pay for like their clothes or like their living expenses, all that stuff with the money that comes from the living, from the trust and the
So living expenses, yes. Clothes up to a certain point, yes.
Okay.
I'd like to say I'm not an attorney. Okay. I am not giving legal advice. I'm just saying my understanding of the program. But again, it's whatever is not covered by Social Security and medical assistance. But that's the purpose of a trust and the ABLE account, really, is to pay for those things that you're currently supporting your child in, like those additional clothes or like a vacation or a trip to the movies or you know, a camping trip, whatever it be. That's what it's supposed to pay for when you're no longer here. Yeah, in the back.
If you open a trust account and you have a life insurance, and the life insurance, you pass away, and you leave money for your kid with special needs, that money, where do you specify you want it to go to the trust?
That's a great question. That's a really great question. So anywhere you can, so let's say that you already have a special needs trust set up. Anywhere that you can list a beneficiary, you would want to list the name of the trust instead of the name of your child. So if you have 2 children, let's say John and Joe, you would say, I want half of my life insurance policy to go to John, and then I want half of my life insurance policy to go to Joe's supplement or special needs trust. So anywhere that there's a beneficiary, you can list the trust. And then as a safeguard, so let's say that you went through all of your estate and you put on every beneficiary that you want the money to go to the trust. As a safeguard, always, just in case, in your will, you're going to state, it's actually really awful language, but your will has to say something like, I disregard my son Joe from receiving any of the money from my estate. So you have to say, like, I disregard my child. Instead, I want the money to be delegated to Joe's special needs trust. So that not only in the beneficiaries for all those programs, you're already saying where you want the money to go, but your will also states it.
How many ABLE accounts can a child have? Can one parent do one?
One. You can only have one ABLE account. And the thing with ABLE accounts as well is each state has usually their own specific ABLE accounts. ABLE accounts are still fairly new. They're only about 1.5 years in the running that states have started to push them out. Minnesota has an ABLE account, Indiana has an ABLE account, Ohio, Florida, and regardless of what state you live in, you can choose whichever state you would like. So Minnesota has a debit card option for their ABLE account. Not every ABLE account has that. So you can shop around and see which one fits you the best, but a person can only have one ABLE account in their name.
Is the ABLE account audited? And who is monitoring that you got to $100,000 and you have to stop?
Great question. Yes, it is audited in Minnesota, it's audited by DHS, which is the Department of Human Services. So DHS, Department of Human Services, is the overall agency that manages all of the disability services. So they are the like holders of the ABLE account, and they have the ability to say, okay, I need your financial records and all of your receipts for the ABLE account. The ABLE account as well, this isn't a part of your question, but it's important to know, if you go to your bank and you ask to set up an ABLE account, they're going to have no idea what you're talking about, because it's still a fairly new process and a new offering, that the ABLE account isn't widespread enough for your average bank teller to know that it's a service. You can only set up an ABLE account online. So for Minnesota, it's savewithable.com/MN. And then for Indiana and Florida, it's all a different web address, but you set it up online. So you go online, and it's actually a really simple process. You just fill out like 10, 15 questions or so. You confirm like what disability your child has, and then a representative calls you on the phone to confirm that you want the account. Any other questions?
Is the $100,000 a lifetime max, or if they spend it down, can you contribute more?
It's like, so you can't go over $100,000. So let's say that you get up to $99,000, and then you buy a car, and you're down, and then you can build it up, and you can play with just that number. But the year amount is $15,000. So in any 1 year, you can only contribute $15,000
per person, for the child, or per adult?
Well, the ABLE account, remember, it's just like a checking account, so it just belongs to one person. So
But I mean, only 15,000 to go to it, or 50,000 from individual person?
Oh, so he's asking, can one person put in $15,000 and another person put in $15,000? No, it's $15,000 total in the account. Doesn't matter who puts it in. That's just like the max of the account for that year.
I went to a presentation on this sort of thing a month or so ago, so I'm still learning it. But one of the interesting things, I don't know if it's here in Minnesota, but in Ohio anyways, they talked about group fund trust accounts. Essentially, it's like it's a group that manages the trust for you.
Oh, like a pooled trust?
And one of the really interesting things that she, kind of like that. I forget, there was some legal name that I cannot recall at this point. But she talked about how they also make sure that, like, if you write your will or your trust or whatever, and then laws change, which I guess they change a lot, they will make sure that the language in your documents is changed also, so that whenever you do pass, your stuff is on point. And just because it happened to change 2 weeks before you got in a fatal car crash, you're not screwed.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the difficult point with doing a presentation for you know, a crew that's from across the United States, because I hear what you're saying, and in Minnesota, what you're referring to is a pooled trust.
Yeah.
So in Minnesota, we have what is called a supplemental needs trust and a special needs trust, which I'll get to in a moment, and a pooled trust. So the difference between that, like a special needs trust and a pooled trust, is a special needs trust is managed by one trustee, whereas a pooled trust is managed by an organization. So the organization manages that instead of one person. And it's really just your preference and what you would want to choose. The trust itself still has the same functionings. The ABLE account is different, and you may be mixing those two up in your head, and it also may be because I'm not familiar with Ohio law.
Yeah, no, they definitely talk about how the pool trust is totally separate from the ABLE.
The pool trust is totally separate from the ABLE account, yeah.
That, you know, actually it's nice to play with it as a parent, because you can put money in and you can kind of see how the money would work upon you being gone. Whereas, like you said, if you do the trust thing, you don't really get to see it in live motion.
You can. So you could set up a lot of people set up a trust, and a lot of people set up a special needs trust, and then they only fund that trust upon their passing. So that trust is going to sit empty for 30 years until they pass or until a grandparent passes, and then money gets into that trust. So that's one option. Another option of how to use the trust is to start funding it right away, and to start using that money in ways that you would want that money to be used upon your passing. So that whoever is a future trustee has kind of a guiding post of what money you want to be spent, how that money wants to be spent. So you can say, I want, every 2 years, I want my child to have a new mattress because they're really rough on their mattresses. And so you can put it in the trust that that's an ongoing expense when you're still here as a way to kind of state your wishes. So you can use a trust in person. When you're still here, you can choose to just have it funded upon your passing. The ABLE account is, the way that I talk about the trust is that's more of a future planning tool, whereas the ABLE account is a here and now checking account that you can play with and you can get cash from. You can't get cash from a trust. What time is it?
So we're about 17
Oh my gosh, we're past time again.
No, you're okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah. You're like, oh, she's coming to cut me off. I'm sorry.
Okay, okay. Anybody else have a question here? Oh, goodness, yes. Right in front.
Just, do I understand it correctly that when the person the trust name is in passes away, that money goes to pay back the government for SSI or any Medicaid benefits?
That's a great question, which will dovetail beautifully into my next slide. I'll do it. It's okay.
Next. Sorry. That was my job.
Okay. So, and this is specific to Minnesota. Okay. This is specific to Minnesota. Your state, if you don't live in Minnesota, may have similar rules, and I'll try to explain it as I know the nationwide rule to fall. So in Minnesota, there are two kinds of trusts. There's a supplemental needs trust and a special needs trust. A supplemental needs trust is typically the one that you want. The supplemental needs trust is a future planning tool. So it's right now when you're in good health and you're thinking about the future and you know that you want to leave your child money in your will, you're going to set up a supplemental needs trust. We call this a third-party trust because it's everybody's money except for your child. So grandparents, aunts and uncles, anybody else except for your child can put money into this trust, the supplemental needs trust. There's no payback clause on the supplemental needs trust because it never actually touched your child. Okay, so you can have a beneficiary on the supplemental needs trust. Whereas in Minnesota, the special needs trust is what we affectionately refer to as the oopsie trust. So, oops, your child has money in their name, maybe somebody forgot and then they just gave $10,000 to your child. Or there's a settlement from an accident, or there's a payback for Social Security, is usually what it is. Then, oops, your child has money in their name. They can't because you don't want to jeopardize their government benefits, so you're going to put it into a special needs trust. It's called a first-party trust because that money is in the person's name at one point, and then you're moving it into a special needs trust. The special needs trust does have a payback clause because at one point it touched your child. So any money upon your child's passing that wasn't spent in the special needs trust goes back to pay the government back for any services they accrued over their lifetime, which is almost always everything. So in Minnesota, we recommend that you set up a supplemental needs trust right now, and then if the situation ever comes back where your child gets a payback or a settlement, then you can set up a supplemental needs trust, or a special needs trust, sorry. Okay, in nationwide, when you talk about a special needs trust, if you hear it anywhere outside of Minnesota, they're referring to the rules of the supplemental needs trust. So if you're in Maryland, or if you're in Ohio, chances are, or California, chances are, when you say special needs trust, they're probably referring to what we call as a supplemental needs trust. The easiest way for you guys to discern what trust you want and what you need is the first party or third party designation. Okay, so a first party trust is when the money was the child's at some points, or your child's at some point. A third party trust is when the money never actually touched your child and was only yours or a grandparent's and is now in the trust. Is that about as clear as mud? Yeah. It's a lot of information. There's a webinar. If you go to arcminnesota.org and you go to our Learning Center, we have a webinar on this specifically and the ABLE account if you want more information. Otherwise, there's our attorney list that we can send you, and there's resources available. So what you want, if you're doing a future planning trust right now, you want to set up a third-party special needs trust. Okay, so you want to say that it's a third-party trust because that money is not your kids right now and you don't want it to be theirs. And it needs to have that special needs trust piece of it, because then the language specific to not affecting government benefits will be in the language of the trust. Okay? Yeah. Actually, the ABLE account is really interesting. The ABLE account, it can be, I forget what it's called, but you can designate the risk, yeah, of the money in the ABLE account. So when you first set up the ABLE account, they'll ask you how risky you want your investment to be, much like when you set up like your 401k. So you can set it up to be moderate or conservative or more risky. So there's an investment piece to the ABLE account as well.
So that depends state from state, so that's what you want to look.
It would depend from state to state. Yeah, there's the investment options and the debit card option are usually the two things that people look for when they're choosing an ABLE account.
Allycia, can we wrap in 3 minutes?
Yes, we can definitely wrap in 3 minutes. Absolutely.
I know there's a lot of really good questions.
Yeah,
People are enjoying it.
That's okay. My cards are up here, as well as a brochure for our programs. I think, did you have one more question?
Oh, I was just coming to ask her. I just kind of wanted to, it was like a public service announcement associated with all of what you've said that I've learned in the last couple of years going through some of these things myself. One is that I have a child that's older than my Pitt Hopkins kid. And I've learned recently that if we do not use all of his education dollars from his 529 plan, that $15,000 of that can go to an ABLE account for Eli. And then the other thing is that, I wrote them down because I know I'll forget. I have no idea. I think it is, there's no penalty associated with that withdrawal.
Yeah, so a lot of people, if they set up a 529 account for their child when they were like first born, and then later on it comes up that that person has a disability, you can transfer the money from a 529 account to an ABLE account because it's based off of the same model. A 529 account is really, really similar structurally to the ABLE account.
529.
That's nationwide.
Yes, that's nationwide. Yeah.
And then the other thing is that
$15,000 per year or $15,000 total?
I think it's just one time because you would like I have one account for both of my children. I didn't know Eli had Pitt Hopkins when I set it up. And so it could transfer to him for educational purposes, but it can also transfer the $15,000 to him for an ABLE account. And that's the extent of my knowledge on it. And then the other item was, I don't know. And so the other thing I wanted to note is that I work for Sprint, and through Sprint, I have a legal plan that it's an optional thing you can sign up for during reimbursement or benefits time. And so the cost of it was minimal, maybe like $300 for the year, but we got our entire trust, will, special needs, everything, all of it set up at no additional cost.
And I've worked with families that have done that as well through the company that they work for, because there's that wonderful legal service option. Just again, to reiterate, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but just to reiterate, to really make sure that that attorney knows what they're doing. One of the families that I was working with used that service and set up the will and their trust because they felt like the person had a good enough base knowledge, and then they went to an attorney in the Twin Cities that we work with often to double check it. So that was the most cost-effective option for them. Yeah. And then the next slide. Okay, so financial planning, how much is enough? We can support you through that, but that's probably a question. How much do I put in that trust? So that would, what we usually suggest families is to, for 1 year, write down all of the costs that you spent on additional costs for your child, and then use that to project an estimate of how much is needed in the future. Keeping it up to date. If you're doing this by yourself, it's important to keep it up to date, to relook at your will and your trust every 5 years or so. You had mentioned earlier that the rules for the trust change often. In Minnesota, actually, they change really rarely, so it's not usually something that people have to worry about here. But it is something to keep in mind. So FutureLife Options is a program that we offer for families, if you want to go to the next slide. So all of these things that I mentioned are things that you can do on your own, right? You can go to an attorney, you can set up a trust, you can set up a will, you can write down everything that you know in your head, you can talk to your child about the future and what they want and how to get to that goal. And it's a lot to manage. It's a lot to force yourself to do, to go through all of those steps. Even though you know that you want to do that and that you need to do that, it can be really overwhelming and it can be really hard. So our FutureLife Options program is a paid service that anybody can sign up for, and we assign you to a planning specialist. And the planning specialist, somebody like myself, would hold your hand and would walk you through every piece of future planning so that you know that you're checking off all of those boxes. You know that you're going to all the right places, you're doing all the right things, you're marking down all of the right notes. And it can be really beneficial to have an outside person guide you through that. A big reason that people come to us is because, not only because of the area of expertise that we have and the knowledge we have, but because that outside accountability can be really substantial for people, and it can be the difference of you getting it done now or getting it done in 10 years, is having that person to push you along and guide you through that framework and push. So, next slide. So that is all. Thank you guys for your time and attention. Really appreciate it. Have a great day. Please feel free to grab my card.